Over the following days, Princess Volanthi found herself creating reasons to visit areas of the palace where the diplomatic delegations worked, and she told herself it was simply curiosity about galactic politics, but she knew the truth. She was watching the human Yoon Jae-won move through the embassy corridors with a quiet confidence that drew no attention to itself. And Volanthi observed him from balconies and through half-open doorways, always careful to remain unseen. He was different from any being she had ever encountered, where other diplomats shouted and postured and demanded respect. Jae-won simply listened, and his patience seemed endless as he translated not just words, but meanings between species that had been enemies for centuries. On the third day, she witnessed something remarkable. Two ambassadors, a Veldrani and a Torvaxian, had gotten into a heated argument in one of the conference halls, and their bodyguards were reaching for weapons as centuries of hatred boiled to the surface. Jae-won stepped between them. "Ambassador Vrix," he said calmly to the Veldrani. "I believe Ambassador Tan meant to say that your proposal has merit, but requires modification. Not that it was foolish, for sometimes the Dorvaxian language carries implications that do not translate well." He turned to the other ambassador, Ambassador Tan. The Veldrani way of presenting ideas can seem aggressive, but it is actually a sign of respect, for they only argue passionately with those they consider worthy opponents. Both ambassadors stared at the small human standing between them, and somehow the tension began to drain from the room. "Perhaps," Jae-won continued gently, "we could take a short break and return to this discussion when everyone has had time to consider the other perspective." The ambassadors grumbled, but agreed. And as they separated, Volanthi saw Jae-won's shoulders relax slightly, and she realized he had been afraid, but had acted anyway that evening. She accessed his personnel file and learned about Earth. The humans called their world a paradise, but by galactic standards, it was a nightmare of extreme temperatures, dangerous predators, violent weather, and a gravity that crushed most species. And yet humans had not only survived there, but had thrived. She also learned about the First Contact War, when the Zithani Empire had arrived at Earth expecting easy conquest, and had instead found a species that refused to surrender. And millions of humans had died before the war ended. But Earth had remained free, and then, despite their victory, despite their justified anger, humans had chosen peace. They had joined the Galactic Union as partners rather than conquerors, and they had dedicated themselves to building bridges between species. Volanthi found herself deeply moved by this history. On the fifth day, she arranged what she hoped would appear to be a chance meeting. The palace gardens were quiet in the early morning, and Volanthi walked among the flowering trees that her mother had planted decades ago. And she waited near the path she knew Jae-won used for his morning walks. He appeared right on schedule, and he stopped in surprise when he saw her. "Your Highness," he said, bowing respectfully, but without the excessive flattery she was accustomed to. "I apologize for intruding on your solitude." "You are not intruding," she replied. "And please, you may call me Volanthi when we are in private." His eyebrows rose slightly at this informality, but he nodded. "Then you may call me Jae-won." "You're Volanthi." They walked together in silence for a moment, and Volanthi felt his emotions through her telepathic senses: curiosity, mild nervousness, and that same gentle warmth she had noticed before. "You handled the situation with the ambassadors very skillfully," she said. "You saw that?" "I see many things in my palace," she replied with a small smile, "and I was impressed. For most beings would have fled from two angry warlords, but you stepped between them." Jae-won shrugged modestly. "Translation is not just about words," he said, "for it is about helping people understand each other, and sometimes that means taking small risks." "Is that why you became a translator?" He was quiet for a moment, and she felt a wave of old grief pass through him like a shadow. "My family died during the First Contact War," he said softly, "and I was just a child. But I remember the fear and the hatred, And I remember thinking that if people could just understand each other, maybe we would not need to fight. Volanti felt her heart ache for him. I am sorry for your loss. It was long ago, he replied, and I have made peace with it, but it drives me to prevent others from experiencing the same pain. So I translate. I build bridges, and I hope that in some small way I am making the galaxy a little less broken. They had reached her mother's favorite fountain, and Volanti stopped to look at the water dancing in the morning light. May I ask you something? J1? Of course. What is your favorite flower? He blinked at the unexpected question. On Earth, we have a flower called a lotus, he said after a moment of thought. And it grows in muddy water, in darkness and difficulty, but it rises above the mud to bloom in the sunlight. Beautiful and pure despite its origins. And I have always found that inspiring. Volanti stared at him in all her years. Through countless diplomatic meetings and formal events, no one had ever given her such a thoughtful answer to such a simple question. And no one had ever answered without first calculating what response might benefit them. Politically, you are unlike anyone I have ever met, she said quietly before J1 could respond. An attendant appeared on the path. Your Highness, the attendant called urgently. The High Chancellor requests your presence immediately. For there is a matter of great importance, Volanti sighed. Duty calls, she said to J1, but I would like to speak with you again. I would like that too, he replied with a genuine smile as she walked away. Volanti finally understood what had been missing from every suitor who had presented himself in the grand selection hall. They had wanted the throne. They had wanted the power. They had wanted the political advantage of marriage to the HFY Empire. But not one of them had wanted her, not one of them had seen the woman beneath the crown. The person behind the title, the heart that longed for genuine connection. Yet this quiet human, this translator from a death world, had spoken to her like she was simply a person. And he had shared his pain with her honestly, and he had answered a question with his heart instead of his ambition. And in that moment, Princess Volanti Kethmara began to imagine a different future than the one everyone expected of her. Princess Volanti Kethmara sat upon her ceremonial throne and watched another suitor approach the presentation platform. And she already knew she would reject him before he even opened his mouth. The grand selection hall stretched before her in magnificent splendor, its crystalline walls catching the light of 3 suns that filtered through ancient windows. And hundreds of nobles from across the galaxy filled the observation galleries to witness this most sacred of HFY traditions. I am Lord Maxis of the Veldrani hegemony, the massive reptilian creature announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. And I bring the strength of 40 conquered worlds to lay at your feet. Princess Volanti felt his emotions wash over her like dirty water, and her mild telepathic abilities revealed exactly what lurked beneath his impressive words: greed, calculation, and absolutely no interest in her as anything more than a stepping stone to power. I thank you for your presentation, Lord Maxis, she said in a voice that betrayed nothing, but I must decline your offer. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the Veldrani lord sputtered in disbelief. And Volanti's uncle, High Chancellor Drethkai, leaned close to her ear. That was the 13th rejection this cycle. He whispered harshly. And the coronation approaches, Volanti. So you must choose someone. I will choose when I find someone worth choosing, she replied without looking at him. The next suitor stepped forward, a HFY nobleman from a powerful outer province. And his telepathic shields were strong, but not strong enough to hide his ambition from her trained senses. She rejected him too, and the next, and the one after that. The afternoon wore on, and Volanti felt exhaustion creeping into her bones as suitor after suitor presented themselves with grand speeches about power and conquest and genetic superiority. And every single one of them saw her throne first and her person never finally. The herald announced the last candidate of the day, Prince Corvan of the Sci-Fi Empire. The crowd stirred with excitement as a tall, silver-skinned being strode confidently toward the platform. And Volanthi had to admit he was impressive to behold. With sharp features and eyes that gleamed like polished metal, Princess Volanthi, he said. And his voice was smooth like silk wrapped around a blade. I have watched you reject lesser beings all day, and I understand your frustration. For none of them are worthy of standing beside you. He smiled. And it was a practiced expression that did not reach his cold eyes. I am different, he continued. And the Sci-Fi Empire spans 300 systems, commands the most advanced fleet in the quadrant, and our union would create a power that no force in the galaxy could challenge. Volanthi opened her telepathic senses fully, and what she felt made her stomach turn cruelty, barely contain violence, and a possessiveness that viewed her as property to be acquired rather than a partner to be cherished. Your offer is impressive, Prince Corvan, she said slowly, but I must also decline. The silence that followed was absolute. Corvan's perfect composure cracked for just a moment, and something ugly flashed in those metallic eyes before he controlled himself. You will reconsider, he said. And it was not a question. I will not. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away without the customary bow. And the insult was noticed by everyone in the chamber. High Chancellor Drethkai grabbed her arm as soon as the formalities ended. Do you have any idea what you have done? He demanded. The Sci-Fi are powerful allies, and you have made a dangerous enemy today. So I hope you are prepared for the consequences. I will not bind myself to a monster simply because he commands a large fleet, Volanthi replied, pulling her arm free. Then who will you choose? Her uncle asked with frustration. The coronation is in 30 days, and tradition demands you have a consort, so perhaps you would prefer we select one for you. You will do no such thing. She walked away from him, her ceremonial robes trailing behind her like a river of starlight. And she needed to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the selection hall. The observation galleries were nearly empty now as diplomats and nobles filtered out to discuss the day's shocking events. And Volanthi was grateful for the relative quiet as she made her way toward a private exit. Then she noticed him. A human stood near the translator station in the corner, organizing data tablets with careful movements. And he wore the simple uniform of the Galactic Union Diplomatic Corps. Volanthi had seen humans before, of course, but she had never paid them much attention, for they were considered a minor species from a harsh and dangerous world, and most beings in the galaxy viewed them as primitive newcomers to interstellar society. But something made her pause. The human looked up, and their eyes met across the distance. And Volanthi felt her telepathic senses reach toward him almost instinctively. What she felt made her breath catch. There was warmth in him, genuine and unguarded. And there was sadness too, deep and old, carried like a familiar weight. But there was no ambition, no calculation, no hunger for power or status. He was simply present, simply himself. And after a day of swimming through the toxic emotions of power-hungry suitors, his quiet authenticity felt like cool water on a burning wound. The human gave a small, respectful nod and returned to his work, clearly not expecting any acknowledgement from royalty. Attendant, Volanthi called softly to her aide. Yes, Your Highness? That human by the translator station, she said, keeping her voice casual. Who is he? The attendant consulted her data tablet. His name is Yunjae-1, Your Highness, and he serves as a diplomatic translator for the Earth delegation. And his file indicates he is highly skilled in cross-species communication. Volanthi watched the human gather his materials and slip quietly out of the hall, unaware that he had attracted the attention of the most powerful woman in the HFY Empire. Interesting, she murmured to herself for the first time in many cycles. Princess Volanthi felt something she had almost forgotten, curiosity, as she returned to her chambers that evening. She found herself thinking not of politics or tradition or the dangerous Prince Corvanshi, but instead of a quiet human with kind eyes and a peaceful heart, and she wondered what his story might be. The council chamber fell into absolute silence when Princess Volanthi made her announcement. And for a long moment, nobody moved. "I wish to add a candidate to the selection process," she repeated calmly. A human from the Earth delegation named Yoon Jae-won, High Chancellor Drethkai, was the first to recover. "Absolutely not," he sputtered, his face darkening with fury. "This is unprecedented. This is absurd. This is an insult to every noble house in the empire." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled councillors. But Volanthi remained unmoved. "I have reviewed the ancient laws," she said, "and there is nothing that restricts my choice to any particular species. For the selection is about finding a worthy consort, not about politics or bloodlines. Humans are primitives," shouted Lord Vexen from his seat. "They crawled out of the mud barely 3 centuries ago, and they come from a savage death world that kills most visitors. So how could one of them possibly be worthy of standing beside our princess?" "I have observed this human closely," Volanthi replied, "and I have found him to possess qualities that none of my other suitors have demonstrated: compassion, wisdom, genuine kindness, and complete absence of political ambition." "Those are not qualities," sneered another councillor. "Those are weaknesses." Volanthi's eyes flashed dangerously. "You would do well to remember to whom you are speaking." "Lord Trethen." The councillor paled and fell silent before the argument could continue. The great doors of the chamber burst open, and Prince Corvan strode in with cold fury radiating from every step. "I have heard of this farce," he declared, "and I demand that this human pest be removed from consideration immediately. For to place him alongside true candidates is an insult to every noble who has presented himself. You forget yourself." "Prince Corvan," Volanthi said icily, "for this is a Kethvori matter, and you have no authority in this chamber." "I have the authority of 300 star systems," Corvan shouted, his composure cracking. "I have the authority of the most powerful fleet in the quadrant, and I will not be humiliated by a primitive ape from a backwater world." He pointed a clawed finger at Volanthi. "You will choose me, princess, or there will be consequences that your precious empire cannot afford." The threat hung in the air like poison, and several councillors shifted nervously in their seats, but Volanthi did not flinch. "Your threats only confirm that I was right to reject you," she said coolly. "For a true leader does not need to threaten, and a true partner does not demand submission." Corvan's silver face contorted with rage, but before he could respond, an elderly councillor rose from his seat. "There is a way to resolve this according to ancient tradition," the old councillor said in a quavering voice. "For when a candidate is challenged, they may prove their worth through the 3 trials, and if the human passes, he may legitimately stand as a suitor." Corvan's expression shifted from rage to cruel satisfaction. "Yes," he said slowly. "Let the human face the trials, and let us see if he survives the first one." The councillors began to murmur among themselves, and Volanthi saw that this was her only path forward. "Very well," she said. "I accept the ancient law, and the human Yoon Jae-won will face the 3 trials." That evening, she found Jae-won in the embassy gardens, and his face was troubled. "I have heard what happened in the council," he said, "and I want you to know that you do not have to do this for me, for I am just a translator, and I have no desire to cause a political crisis." Volanthi shook her head. "You do not understand, Jae-won, for this is not about politics anymore, and it was never just about you." She sat beside him on the stone bench. "All my life, I have been told whom to marry, how to behave, what to want, and every suitor who approaches me sees only a throne, only power, only advantage. But you looked at me and saw a person." She met his eyes. "You asked me about my favorite flower. And no one has ever asked me something so simple, so genuine. And in that moment, I realized that I've spent my entire life surrounded by beings who want something from me. And not a single one who wanted to know who I actually am. J1 was quiet for a long moment. "I will be honest with you," he said finally. "For I am not a warrior, and I am not a prince. And I am just a man who lost his family and decided to spend his life trying to build bridges instead of walls. So I do not know if I can pass these trials." "You may be surprised," Volanti replied. "For humans have a reputation in this galaxy, and your species has proven again and again that you should not be underestimated. And if I fail, then you fail, and nothing changes. But at least we will have tried." J1 looked at her for a long moment, and then a small smile crossed his face. "You know what? I have survived worse, and you looked like you needed someone in your corner. So I will do this." Volanti felt her heart warm. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet," he said with a wry expression. "For I have a feeling Prince Corvan is going to make these trials as deadly as possible." "He will try," Volanti agreed. "But I have faith in you, J1, and I believe you are stronger than you know." He took her hand gently, and the gesture was so simple, so human, and it meant more to her than all the grand speeches and political declarations she had ever received. "Then let us show them what a quiet human can do," he said. News of the trial spread across the galaxy within hours, and beings from hundreds of worlds made plans to witness what promised to be either a historic upset or a spectacular failure. No one expected the human to survive. But then again, that was what they had said about Earth during the First Contact War, and they had been wrong then too. The arena of proving was ancient beyond memory, carved from living crystal during the first days of the Kethvori Empire. And today it was filled with millions of spectators who had come to watch a human face the impossible. Yun J1 stood at the entrance gate and looked up at the vast amphitheater. And despite his calm exterior, his heart pounded against his ribs. Princess Volanti had wished him luck that morning, and her faith in him was both comforting and terrifying. For he did not want to disappoint her. Prince Corvan stood across the arena floor, his silver skin gleaming under the harsh lights. And his smile was the smile of a predator who already tasted blood. "The first trial is combat," the herald announced. "And the challenger has chosen the weapon's bare hands." A murmur ran through the crowd, and J1 understood immediately what Corvan intended. The Scilothi were stronger than humans by a significant margin, and without weapons to equalize the fight, Corvan expected to simply tear J1 apart with his bare claws. But Corvan did not understand humans. The signal sounded, and the prince charged with terrifying speed. His claws extended and aimed at J1's throat. J1 did not try to block the attack. Instead, he moved. He had learned long ago that humans could not match most species in raw strength, but they could outlast almost anything. And their reflexes, honed by millions of years of predator evasion on a death world, were sharper than most beings realized. Corvan's claws sliced through empty air as J1 ducked and rolled, and the prince's momentum carried him past his target. Again and again, Corvan attacked, and again, J1 simply was not there, moving with the efficient grace of a species that had survived ice ages, mass extinctions, and each other. Minutes passed, and Corvan was breathing heavily now, his attacks growing slower and less precise, and fury distorted his handsome features as the human continued to evade him. J1 was tired too, but he was not exhausted, for human endurance was legendary among those who had studied the species. And marathon runners and persistence hunters had shaped his genetics for exactly this kind of sustained effort. "Stand still and fight," Corvan screamed. "That would be unwise." J1 replied calmly. The prince roared and launched himself forward one more time. Putting all his remaining strength into a devastating blow, J1 sidestepped, caught Carvan's extended arm, and used the prince's own momentum to send him crashing to the arena floor. The crowd gasped. Corvan lay stunned, and for a long moment the arena was silent. "The first trial is complete," the herald announced, voice trembling with shock, "and the human is victorious in the royal box." Princess Velanti allowed herself a small smile. The second trial was called the Mind Maze, and it was an ancient puzzle chamber designed to test logic, perception, and mental acuity. And its challenges had defeated some of the greatest minds in galactic history. Both candidates entered the chamber simultaneously, and holographic obstacles and riddles materialized around them. Kavan attacked the puzzles with raw telepathic power, forcing solutions through sheer mental strength. And his approach was effective, but wasteful. Like using a cannon to open a door, J1 approached differently. He observed each puzzle carefully, looking for patterns and connections, and he thought about the beings who had created these challenges thousands of years ago, asking himself what they had intended, what lessons they had wanted to teach when he encountered a riddle about sacrifice. He thought about his lost family and the choice his species had made to pursue peace after the war. When he faced a puzzle about communication, he applied everything he had learned as a translator about bridging gaps between different minds. When the final challenge asked him to demonstrate understanding of another being's perspective, he thought about Velanti, about her loneliness, her desire to be seen as a person rather than a prize, her quiet courage in defying tradition. The chamber doors opened, and J1 emerged first. The timekeepers confirmed that he had completed the mind maze faster than any candidate in 300 years. Corvan emerged minutes later, and his silver face was dark with humiliation and rage. "The second trial is complete," the herald announced, "and the human is victorious." The crowd was no longer silent now, and excited murmurs filled the arena as beings who had come to watch a spectacle realized they were witnessing history. The third trial was called the Heart Trial, and it was the most important, for it tested not skill or intelligence but worthiness of spirit. And each candidate was required to demonstrate why they deserved to stand beside the Princess. Corvan went first. "I offer power," he declared, "and I offer the might of the Scythian Empire, 300 star systems strong, and with me at her side, Princess Velanti will rule a domain that no enemy would dare challenge. For strength is the only currency that matters in this galaxy." His speech was impressive, and many in the crowd nodded in approval. Then it was J1's turn. He stood before the judges, and for a moment he was silent, gathering his thoughts. "I offer no empires," he said finally, "and I command no fleets, for I am just a translator, a builder of bridges. A man who lost his family and decided to spend his life preventing others from experiencing the same pain." He looked up at the royal box where Velanti sat. "But I can tell you what I believe about partnership," he continued. "For I believe that a true partner does not seek to rule but to support, and does not demand submission but offers understanding, and does not see a throne or a title but sees a person, with hopes and fears and dreams and a heart that deserves to be known and cherished." His voice was quiet but carried through the silent arena. "Princess Velanti asked me about my favorite flower, and I told her about the lotus, which grows in mud and darkness, but rises to bloom in the light. And I see that same beauty in her, a spirit that has endured loneliness and expectation, and yet remains kind and hopeful." He took a breath. "I do not know if I'm worthy of standing beside her, but I know that I would spend every day trying to be, not for power or politics, but because she deserves someone who sees her for who she truly is." The arena was absolutely silent. Then, slowly, applause began to build, starting in the common sections and spreading upward until the entire amphitheater thundered with the sound of approval. The judges conferred briefly. "The third trial is complete," the herald announced, And the human is victorious, for he has demonstrated the heart of a true partner in the royal box. Princess Volanti wiped a tear from her cheek, but in the challengers section, Prince Corvan stood motionless, and his silver eyes burned with a hatred that went beyond mere humiliation. He had been defeated by a humana primitive and insect from a backwater world, and, as he watched the crowd celebrate the impossible victory, something dark and terrible took root in his heart. If he could not win the princess through the trials, then he would take her by force, and he would make the human pay for every moment of this humiliation. The night before the coronation, Princess Volanti could not sleep, and she stood on her balcony, watching the 3 moons rise over the capital city. Tomorrow, everything would change. She would become empress, and more importantly, she would publicly announce her choice of consort, and the galaxy would witness a human standing beside the ruler of the Kethvori Empire. For the first time in history, a soft knock came at her door, and her attendant entered with a troubled expression. "Your Highness, there is a situation at the outer gates." Before Volanti could respond, the palace shook with the sound of an explosion, and alarms began screaming throughout the ancient halls. "What is happening?" she demanded. The answer came in the form of plasma fire lighting up the night sky. Prince Corvan had brought his fleet soldiers in Silathi. Armor poured through breaches in the palace walls, and palace guards fell before their superior firepower. And chaos erupted in every corridor as servants and nobles fled from the Valanza Volanti, grabbed a weapon from her bedside cabinet, a ceremonial blade, but sharp enough to kill, and prepared to fight. Then J1 burst through her door. "We need to move," he said urgently. "For Corvan has landed troops throughout the palace, and they are specifically targeting your location." "How did you get here?" "I ran," he said simply, and she noticed blood on his arm where he had clearly already encountered resistance. "But we do not have time for explanations, so please, Your Highness, we need to go now." They ran through servant passages and hidden corridors that even Volanti barely remembered, and J1 moved with a purpose that surprised her. "You know this palace well," she said. "I memorized the layout on my second day here," he replied. "For I learned long ago to always know how to get out of a building when things go wrong." They emerged into a defensive courtyard where loyal palace guards had established a position. But the situation was grim, and Silathi soldiers were pressing from multiple directions. "Your Highness," the guard captain shouted with relief. "We feared you had been captured." "How bad is it?" "Bad," the captain admitted. "For Corvan has landed nearly 1,000 troops, and our reinforcements from the outer provinces are still hours away." An explosion rocked the far wall, and Silathi soldiers began pouring through the breach. "Fall back," the captain ordered, but there was nowhere to fall back to. And Volanti realized with cold certainty that they were about to be overrun then. J1 stepped forward. "Get the princess to safety," he said to the captain, "and I will hold them here." "J1, no." Volanti grabbed his arm. "You cannot fight an army by yourself." He turned to her, and his eyes were calm in a way that frightened her. "I am not going to fight an army," he said gently, "but I am going to buy you time. And that is what humans do. We survive. We endure. We keep going when everything says we should stop. And right now, you need time." He pressed something into her hand, a small data chip. "This contains evidence of Corvan's attack, transmitted to every diplomatic channel in the galaxy, and by morning, every species will know that he violated sacred tradition and attacked a sovereign world. So even if he takes the palace, he will never hold it." Tears burned in Volanti's eyes. "I cannot lose you." "You will not," he promised. "For humans are harder to kill than we look." He kissed her forehead gently, then turned and walked toward the breach. What happened next became legend. Yoon Jae-won stood in that gap for 17 minutes. He fought with every technique humanity had developed over millennia of violence and survival, and his body absorbed punishment that would have killed any other species 3 times over. But humans had evolved on a world that tried to murder them every single day, and they did not know how to quit. He broke bones and kept fighting. He took plasma burns and kept fighting. He was beaten down and got back up, again and again, because that was what humans did. And finally, the sound of engines filled the air as HFY reinforcements arrived, and Sci-Fi soldiers began to fall back as overwhelming firepower rained down upon them. Prince Corvan was captured trying to reach his shuttle, and his face was a mask of disbelief as he was dragged before the guards. "This is impossible," he sputtered. "One human cannot stop an army." But one human had Volanti found J1 lying in the ruins of the courtyard, and medics were already working frantically to save his life. And for one terrible moment, she thought she was too late. Then his eyes opened and he smiled weakly. "Did we win?" "Yes," she laughed through her tears. "Yes, you impossible man. We won." The coronation happened 3 days later, delayed only long enough for J1 to be able to stand. He stood beside her as the crown was placed upon her head, bandaged and bruised but alive. And the galaxy watched through 1 billion screens as Empress Volanti Kathmara took her throne. "Before I accept my crown," she announced to the assembled dignitaries, "I must name my consort, as tradition demands." She turned to J1, and her smile was radiant. "I choose this man." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and an ambassador raised his voice. "Your Majesty, if I may ask, why a human? Of all the powerful candidates who presented themselves, why choose a translator from a minor world?" Volanti looked at the assembled nobles and diplomats, the same beings who had dismissed J1 as primitive and unworthy, because everyone else saw a throne. She said simply, "And he saw me." She took his hand, because when my palace was falling and my guards were overwhelmed, he stood alone against an army so that I might live. She raised their joined hands, because strength is not measured in fleets or star systems or political power. It is measured in the courage to sacrifice, in the wisdom to build bridges instead of walls, and in the capacity to love without calculation. Her voice rang through the hall. The HFY Empire has always valued strength, and today I've shown you what true strength looks like. It looks like a quiet human who asked me about my favorite flower and then held a breach against impossible odds because he believed I was worth protecting. She looked out at the galaxy that was watching. Let this be the beginning of a new era, where we measure worth not by the power to destroy, but by the courage to care. The applause began slowly but built into a thunderous wave, and even those who had doubted found themselves moved by her words that evening. As the celebrations continued in the halls below, Volanti and J1 stood on her balcony watching the moon's rise. "Are you frightened?" she asked. "Of what comes next? Of being consort to an empress? Of the responsibilities and dangers?" J1 considered the question carefully. "A little," he admitted. "But I have learned that fear is not the opposite of courage. Giving up is. And I will never give up on you." She leaned against him, and he put his arm around her. "I used to think I was alone," she said softly, "that no one would ever see past the crown to the person underneath." "You were never alone," he replied. "You just had not found your partner yet." And there, under the light of 3 moons, the Empress of the HFY Empire and the quiet human who had won her heart stood together, looking out at a galaxy that would never be quite the same, for they had shown the universe a simple truth that humans had always known, that love is stronger than power, that kindness is mightier than conquest, and that sometimes the greatest strength is found in the quietest heart.